Hi and welcome everybody to another episode of the Echo Podcast. The Echo Podcast is a series of discussions revolving around the global revolution of remote work. And today's topic is pivoting business partnerships for a remote world. And I'm joined today by my panelists, Sandra from Certec Exchange and Jeremy from Today But Then. It would be great if both of you, Sandra and Jeremy, could quickly introduce yourselves in a few sentences, who you are and what you do, to our audience and listeners. Sandra.
Sure. Thank you, Lee, and I'm delighted to join you and Jeremy today. I'm a non-executive director, a board advisor, and a mentor. Previously Chief People Officer in FTSE 100 technology companies. And I have a keen interest in technology and the positive difference it can make to our lives personally and professionally. I'm delighted to be here.
We are delighted to have you, Sandra. Thank you. Jeremy.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, likewise, very happy to be here. Thanks for having me along. So I'm an HR and communications consultant. I work for myself after being an HR director and a marketing director in social care, healthcare and early years education for the most part. I'm particularly passionate about culture, engagement and organisational soul. And as we move to a more remote workforce, I think there's going to be some really interesting innovations in that. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Definitely. Happy to have you, Jeremy. Thank you both. So let's just start our conversation. I mean, it's pretty obvious that the COVID-19 crisis has sort of, changed a lot and will keep doing so. And we have been, obviously, in light of this, been witnessing how businesses and organizations around the world are rapidly adjusting to the changing needs and requirements of their workforce, their customers and suppliers, in parallel, obviously, to navigating their financial and operational challenges. And I believe that sort of current and future stability really depends on swift C-suite action, sort of near-term action to kind of promote business continuity and sort of stability and strategic moves to create new futures for their brands and industry. So it's obviously no secret that the journey defined by agility and digital transformation has truly commenced. And this means that leaders and industries really ought to assess each and every opportunity that emerges from the pandemic, or in other words, turn their focus on leveraging every contact within their corporate networks and business partnership opportunities in order to sort of support the global economic recovery. And taking this into account, Sandra, what would you say is the general sort of partnership attitude at present within the markets?
Well, I think that partnerships for me certainly are about two parties coming together with compatible goals and compatible values to bring their resources together to create a positive difference. And this could be a value-added service, it could be information, or it could be advice. And I think that these relationships are really built on trust and collaboration. And often trust and collaboration has been built over time. And I think in this pandemic, it's been very difficult to build and develop trust over time because the face-to-face interactions aren't really what they were pre-COVID-19. I have found that my partners have acted in different ways, actually. Some of them I've not heard from at all. It's completely silent. And some of them I have noticed have really pivoted very quickly their mode of operation. And they've used technology to really reach lots of customers and potential clients and customers using that digital technology. So I think what the main purpose has been to leverage the brand, to develop that brand so that they can soar out of this pandemic when the situation changes. And I have been quite impressed by the reaction of some of my partners, and less impressed with others.
Yeah. No, I actually experienced something very similar. What about you, Jeremy? What's your sort of feeling or thoughts? What have you experienced so far?
Sure. I mean, I agree. Trust and collaboration, the things that make up relationships, which, all this is about relationships, I think are absolutely crucial. I've spent most of my career as the customer, so I kind of look at this through a slightly different prism as being on the recipient. And the message that I'm picking up from people are, that's really interesting. I'm just a bit busy right now. And so I think there's a natural curiosity. Yeah. And I think people really are. I think they're really curious. If anything, this has supercharged innovation. There's nothing like a crisis to force innovation. And I think this was already happening. The kind of trajectory towards technology enabling people was already happening. And I think people are really keen, and really curious is probably the best word, because they want to learn more about it. They're just really busy right now, putting out some fires and taking care of business.
It's all about timing, I guess. And once everyone has calmed down a little, I think we will seriously kind of, get on with it. Sort of also these times are obviously, it's an uncertainty that we're all facing, and obviously in order to outmaneuver it, I believe that businesses and organizations really need to come up very quickly with nimble and agile sort of programs of reinvention, if you like. And in light of that, Jeremy, I'm just wondering, do you reckon, or do you find that there are now fewer or more opportunities in means of like business relationships, especially in the healthcare and hospitality sector, knowing that there are two industries that have obviously been heavily impacted by COVID-19 in different ways? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I'm a natural optimist, but I think even if I wasn't, I'd probably say that there were more. We can see that businesses are going to constrict, but when you do that, actually, you're going to have to innovate. I don't think the amount of work that's going to need to be done is going to reduce significantly. It's just going to have to be done differently. So I think there are more. I think as we come out of COVID, we're quite right. There will be a more remote workforce, and that is going to bring a number of challenges. I've worked in dom care. I chair a local charity that's involved in domiciliary care, and so we already know how to manage a hard to reach workforce. We already know how to engage and communicate with people that don't come into the office every day. But there's lots of other businesses where people have always gone into the office, and that physical water cooler that we've always talked about just isn't going to be there for people. And actually, utilizing technology, not just to be efficient. You can see delivery drivers using handhelds, and the technological bits of innovation that they've come has just blown that business out of the water. It's brilliant in comparison. But also, in addition to actually getting the job done, from an HR and comms point of view, being able to engage people, be able to collaborate on different projects, being able to check in with people, well-being, mental health is all really, really important. And so whilst it's great to have people working from home or remotely, there's going to be a lot of organizational challenges, not just in getting the work done. And things like, I think Echo potentially are really well positioned to support both getting the job done and also keeping in touch with the remote workforce. So that springs to mind. I think timing, as you mentioned, is crucial. And as we kind of come out of COVID, there are lots of businesses, we've historically used that kind of plate spinning metaphor, and manage this, and there really will be lots of plates to be spun. There will be lots of businesses that will be making significant cost cutting, and there'll be other businesses that need to hire people to do jobs that haven't been done before. So delivery drivers for Tesco's, for example, and then the reduction of people working in pubs and clubs and restaurants in the City of London, for example. So we know that there are going to be challenges. And I think, some advice I'm giving businesses is compartmentalize. Have one group of people concentrating on cost control, have another group of people concentrating on revenue generating opportunities, and have a third group of people seriously considering new ways of working. So efficiency, if you like, in old money. And so I think that's going to be a really important triangle. And the people that are working on different ways of doing things are as important as people that are making sure the lights are kept on and people that are making sure that we're still selling services to new customers. So yeah, I think that's going to be really, so as I say, a bit of an optimist. I hope that kind of helps a little, but I think there are more opportunities, just different maybe how we thought about them before.
But I think it's very important to remain an optimist, especially in these times, and just, you know, keep going.
What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, we've already had it, exactly. Would you like to add anything to that, Sandra, by the way?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think the opportunities will be different. And as Jeremy said, they're going to be very different in different sectors. And they're going to hit organisation in waves. There's going to be different needs that organisations are going to need at different times. And I'd suggest that a great partner is the one that understands their USP, their unique selling point, and understands the challenges and opportunities that their potential clients and customers have, and then target their services very specifically to that business at the right time in the right way. And I think, you know, I would suggest that those are going to be the partners that will succeed at this chaotic time for so many of us.
For sure.
Yeah, true. That's very, very true. Thank you for sharing and adding forward. Obviously, you know, we kind of are entering this era that some people say is defined by fast changing shifts in cultural norms, societal behaviours and values, including sort of an increased demand of sort of responsible business practices and sort of a renewed brand purpose. And in relation to that, Sandra, would you say that the new world is almost forcing us to redefine the traditional meaning of business relationships or alliances as we have known them so far? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think the meaning of business alliances is going to change, Lee. I think it will continue to be about organisations coming together, combining their resources to either improve cost or improve services. I think that central purpose of a business alliance will be the same. For me, it's going to be how it's done is going to be really very different. We've already talked about remote working. We've already talked about the importance of relationships and how behaviours are going to have to change to build relationships in a remote way. I think it's pushed forward the requirement for digital technology. It's accelerated the requirement for digital technology. And I was reading just yesterday that in the post-COVID world, 50%, a big number, 50% of the workforce is going to work across 3 different places, sometime at home, sometime in their office, and sometime in a third place, like a coffee shop, for example. So I think the way in which business and alliances need to be nurtured and developed are going to be different. We've seen already how technology companies have combined with the government to work on track and trace technology. They're even working on applications so that people can avoid crowds when they're going to work. We've seen manufacturers switch their operations to now provide the PPE. So business alliances will continue to be done. They'll just be done differently, and they'll be doing them in slightly different ways using technology, I think, more. And I can't see, I don't think there's any going back now from the leveraging of digital technology in this post-COVID world. It's going to be a different world in the workplace and also for communications and engagement with talent. It's a very different proposition now, and there is no going back. That's the world that we live with.
So very true. Absolutely. It's a bit crazy, but I think as challenging as it all sounds, it is quite exciting as well, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
So would you like to add something to that as well, Jeremy, by the way? I absolutely agree with you, and Sandra, well said.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I suppose if I stick my customer's hat on again, I wonder whether fewer face-to-face relationship. I wonder, and as a customer, I think the face-to-face interactions that I used to have suppliers was more important to the supplier than it was to me. So I didn't really need it, to be honest with you. Once I had the trust and we had the relationship, and I knew what the system was doing, and it was working. You know, I didn't need to, you know, I was rubbish at corporate hospitality and sporting events, and it just does nothing for me. And I've got to say that I think that, you know, we've already started moving away from that over the past few years anyway. I just think this is the next stage in the process.
Obviously.
And I think it's less emotional, it's more entrepreneurial. You know, lots of organizations have talked about fast decision making and less bureaucracy and you know, and all of those things. So I think the win for technology companies that want to kind of get into businesses is make that decision making process easy, trustworthy, robust, safe. You know, tick all the relevant boxes, and then just make it really easy for people to understand. So, you know, I think large companies are going to be more entrepreneurial. They'll have flatter overheads, they'll have flatter structures. They'll be kind of, you know, disseminating decision-making processes to remote workforces already. People will be making decisions that won't even be in an office. So why would we try and overcomplicate it as part of that journey?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's, and you're quite right. I think when Sandra says there's no going back, you know, when lockdown happened, I bought a book of 12 stamps and promised myself that I'd write to my mum because she'd like getting posts because I wasn't going to be able to go and visit her. I've still got 10 stamps. And I feel terrible about that, but I've been, you know, I ring her and I use WhatsApp and technology and whatever it happens to be. So yeah, why would we go back?
Yeah, you know? Exactly. Why would we? I couldn't agree more. So obviously it's very critical to keeping the global sort of economy stable and viable. That's sort of what we already touched on, you know, organizations and executive teams really ought to reevaluate how they are utilizing and will be utilizing digital channels to support their new sort of business roadmaps and strategies to push them obviously through and beyond the crisis. And it kind of like, again, we cut on this already a bit earlier. How do you see sort of, you know, knowing that business alliances have been typically sort of established, nurtured, and sort of fostered in personal face-to-face, and it's, you know, obviously that no longer being an option, that will bring some new challenges and obstacles. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that, Jeremy, by any chance?
Yeah, so I think kind of it probably builds on our previous comments, to be fair. I think challenges could be getting to the right decision maker efficiently. So actually engaging with somebody who understands the value of a new piece of technology and the, you know, what it can bring to the business and how easy that decision is for them to make. They could then go and sit in a boardroom that's talking about redundancies and significant cost cutting. And so anything that actually is an additional cost could get drowned out. So there is a challenge that whilst, you know, a new way of working could be really positive, you could just miss out on timing because you happen to be presenting it in the wrong forum at the wrong time. That's a bit unlucky. And I think obstacles, which kind of builds on that as well, is about who shouts loudest. And, you know, I think finance guys are really important. And most, you know, in my experience, most finance guys have got more soul than they're given credit for. And they understand the longer term implications of different ways of doing things and short-term investment for long-term benefit. So whereas actually I've had some people say, I know that you've got to get this past the numbers guy, when actually when I've had the conversation with the numbers guy, they've been much more tolerant of trying to understand how something works and what the long-term cost of an introduction might be. So I do think there's some obstacles and challenges of perception as well as reality of losing out to people shouting loudest. And that takes me back, I suppose, to my first triangle, where I was talking about one, you know, a part of the business thinking about, you know, cost savings and making sure the bills get paid. Another part of the business looking at revenue generation, and a third really important part of the business looking at more efficient ways of working, which something like eco I think fits slap bang into the middle of. If I go back to dom care, for example, if you try to introduce something into domiciliary care 5 years ago, very few people had handhelds. Everything was paper, and it was really quite difficult. So whilst I absolutely valued the eco proposition, I just said it's just too difficult. Whereas now, most dom care providers have got a handheld, and if they haven't, they've got one coming. And that does, so you've got rotors, you've got care plans, you've got internal communications, but lots of them still use WhatsApp. Lots of them still use, Facebook and bits and pieces like that. And I think Echo's got the opportunity to fill that void because of the security and the safety. But it is all about intuition. It's got to be really simple to understand, and it's got to be really hard to say no to. And so the hardware is there, and it wasn't a few years ago. And I think that's going to be the case in a lot of businesses. There'll be lots of businesses now working from home who just haven't had to work like that. So they're relying on, domestic social networks to get things done. And there's half a dozen of them, 15 different WhatsApp groups, and someone else is on a Zoom and someone else is on a Teams and someone else, and I just think having something that could really help people say, this is how we communicate, this is how we collaborate. You may have the hardware, but this is how we do this, I think is a really good opportunity. Not to say it hasn't got its challenges. I hope that helped.
Yeah, it definitely makes perfect sense. So just sort of coming back to our sort of conversation, and it's sort of very obvious that actions taken now have an immediate impact on the company's or an organization's survival, and sort of how quickly it will bounce back from the global downturn, or in other words, its financial health and sustainability going forward. And again, we have been witnessing how both public and private players around the globe have come up or introduced alliances and sort of initiatives to sort of support the financial institutions and MSMEs, which are obviously creating the backbone of our sort of industries and sort of economy. And every day there are new sort of types of these alliances emerging, where global brands and leading companies really put great minds together, sort of in the spirit of community and solidarity. And it kind of makes one wonder, should an organization come together for the common good, or prioritize that over, revenue generation or sort of their own commercial success? What are your thoughts on that, Sandra?
I'm very clear about that in my own mind. I believe that businesses have to do both, Lou. I think revenue generation and work for the good of the community is not mutually exclusive. I think organisations can generate income and revenue, and they can do good things for society and for the environment. They're not mutually exclusive. I also think that people have higher expectations on business today, probably more than ever before. And coming out of this crisis, people will be able to think about how COVID-19 has really realised the best of humankind, I think, in so many ways, whether this is the support for NHS, social workers, key workers, or whether this is help for the vulnerable, or whether this is increased donations to the food bank. COVID-19 has increased societal impact, I think, in the minds of people. And I think people in the future will choose to work for those companies that do both, that have a sense of purpose, either for the environment and or society. I think people will choose. There's no doubt, Lee, this pandemic has had or will have a significant impact on employment. There is no doubt. We're hearing news every day about organisations reducing their workforce. I'm not denying that for a moment, but people have long memories, and they will think about the brands that did good things during this time and the brands that did not so good things during this time. And they will choose to work for those companies that fit their own values, as Jeremy said right at the top of the call, the culture that seems the best for them. So yeah, I think there is a lot that organisations can do to make profit and do good things.
I couldn't agree more. I actually believe it's almost like, like you said, companies need to like invest in both routes, or because one can't exist without the other one anyway. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well, Jeremy.
I think it's clearly hard to disagree with. I think the only postscript I'd add to that is an element of locality. So, over the years we've had kind of think global, act local, and HSBC probably isn't the best example to be using at the moment with what politically they're kind of sticking their weight behind over in China. But they kind of did get the we're your local global bank, or your global local, or whatever it happened to be. And I think large organizations have a responsibility to drive this technology agenda and make working from home easier to access for smaller organizations. But from a values and a giving back point of view, it's just essential. It's not even a nice to do anymore. I do think the locality piece, though, there will be a lot of people working from home that will have some challenges. Local mental health charities, local, as you mentioned, food banks, unbelievable that they exist at all, but nevertheless, they do at the moment. And large organizations, organizations that are successful have a moral obligation to help the communities in which they operate. And I think that's not going to be a nice to do going forward. And as I totally agree with Sandra, I think we'll remember some of the brands that perhaps haven't come out of this as brilliant. I think my local high street is actually going to benefit because, I hope anyway, but I think there are lots of potential opportunities that might come out. But organizations for years and years have talked about vision, mission and values. And I think post-COVID, people will scrutinize the walk, and they will vote with their pounds and their feet with organizations that do both.
I honestly hope that all three of us are right with our predictions there, because I think anyone taking initiative and sort of, supporting the bigger picture is to me, it's admirable, and it's definitely something that we should remember them by and support for whatever is to come. Sort of on that note, obviously, the post-pandemic world kind of demands almost for like the new business roadmaps and strategies to be built on agility, speed and longevity. And technically, that means sort of shifting top-down decision-making almost, i.e. sort of really empowering your workforce and teams, and make sure that they're guided by a new purpose and sort of driven by data, and sort of powered by technology and enabled by the cloud. So how would you say, Sandra, that COVID-19 has impacted on your immediate and sort of long-term business strategies?
Wow, that's a big question. How long do we have? I've got so many learnings, personally and professionally, but let me just summarise them as I see them. I think as a board advisor, I'm going to be much more conscious about operational stability. I think in some organisations they've trimmed right the way down on the efficiency side, and they don't necessarily have the resources to be able to respond to more difficult times. So I'm going to be much more conscious about operational stability in organisations. The environment and social impact will continue to be very important to me. I believe it to my soul that businesses need to give something back, and they need to find ways of doing that. I'm going to be particularly focused on the things that have always been a passion of mine, whether that's diversity, whether it's inclusion, and well-being now, all of those things take on a very different challenge in a remote working environment. You know, what do you provide for your colleagues at work to help them with well-being? It's not a secret that it's quite difficult to work alone and remotely. And how does an organisation make sure that diversity continues to be important as in an open environment, with well-being also right up there in terms of importance? I'm going to continue, you know, all of this is a red thread here, isn't there? There's a red thread. I'm going to continue to promote the use of digital technology, like the Echo solution, because the only way forward is to engage people to do their best work productively and be happy. And I think digital technology like the Echo solution actually makes that happen. That's the answer to many of those things. And then finally, I'm going to continue with my yoga, because without it, I tell you, without it, I would never have survived this lockdown. So I'm going to hold on to that as we move forward post-COVID. So lots of other things, but that's how I would summarise them.
That sounds absolutely great. Thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. And I'm actually equally keen to hear your thoughts on that, Jeremy. How has anything changed your sort of business approach?
I mean, I'm relatively small, so it's really helpful for me to listen to a lot of this. HR at the moment is quite bitty. You know, there's lots of employee relations challenges, immediate fires that need to be put out. And actually, sometimes it's quite tricky to have the long-term organisational conversation whilst there are some fires to be put out. But actually, now is the time to have those conversations. You know, what will we look like in the future? What do we want to look like, and how are we going to get there? I help small organisations grow. I help medium-sized organisations grow without losing what they started out doing, because they all started out with an entrepreneurial story. They all have values that got them to where they get to, and then when you go through that rapid growth, everything, you know, there's always a risk you lose a bit of soul. And actually, this is no different to that. This is just different. And so there'll be organisations that will be scattering their workforces to the four winds. And actually, that's just a different challenge in terms of organisational soul. So I am spending quite a bit of time looking and building up tools that I can help with that. A friend of mine works for an organisation. I live in Hitchin, which is kind of a commuter town north of London. A friend of mine worked in London. He got sent home at the beginning of the pandemic to work from home. And they've made the decision over the pandemic to say, well, you don't have to come back in at all. So they're going to save all the rent on these fancy offices in London. That's going to save him £400 a month on train fares. And it's going to save him at least 2 hours a day. So that's, 10 hours a working week and £400 a month that he's better off by. That's just bonkers, isn't it, really? So he is going to be in my high street buying his sandwich at lunchtime. So that's going to help my high street. He's not going to be on the train. So that's going to help the trains. He's not going to be on the roads, blah, blah, blah. So you can kind of extrapolate it. But he works for a large organization. And that's my point about getting large organizations to really help the communities in which they operate. It's no longer the community where the office was. It's the communities where the employees live and work and contribute. So there's some really interesting potential opportunities that come out from that. I'm not going to be doing yoga, although I admire those.
I can do the remote teach.
I could pretend, couldn't I? So Today But Then is my business name. It's an odd name, but I do film history, classic silver screen history. And so I've got this book that I want to write that everybody does. And so actually, if I call it Today But Then as my business, everyone says, what does that mean? And I've got nowhere to hide. So one of the benefits of the pandemic is I've been doing quite a bit of work on that, which is really helpful. And today, there are not many brilliant films were released today, but it is Judy Garland's birthday. And so within the pandemic and it's raining here, I can't help but click my heels together and tell you to stay safe, because there's no place like home.
Very awesome project. Can't wait to see. You have to share that with us when it's ready, Jeremy.
I will. $15.99.
Yeah. We sadly have come to an end of our sort of Echo podcast and the episode Pivoting Business Partnerships for a Virtual World. I would like to thank both of you. It was absolutely lovely that, and that you've joined and that you've shared your thoughts and ideas with us. Obviously, I would like to thank everyone who has listened and tuned in. And as always, you can find us on any social media channel under Echo, EKO, or echo.com. And until next time, stay well and safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.